All right, on this day, May 15, 2001, Apple began a major shift in how the company connected with its customer. Steve Jobs on that day publicly provided details of plans to sell Mac computers directly through Apple-owned retail stores. It was an expansion away from a sales strategy that had up to then been heavily reliant on third-party retailers like Circuit City, Sears, and CompUSA. But legend has it that Jobs was frustrated with the retail partnerships and what he viewed as inadequate visibility of Apple products inside those stores and staff members that weren't experienced enough or enthusiastic enough to showcase the technology. At the time, Apple only had less than 5% of the U.S. computer market, and Jobs said that the company's own research showed the other 95% didn't even give Apple products a second thought. Jobs even griped at the Macworld trade show in January of that year that, quote, buying a car is no longer the worst purchasing experience. Buying a computer is number one. Of course, that somewhat audacious comment and even more audacious solution for Apple to have its own retail footprint was met with quite a few raised eyebrows. Competing computer maker Gateway had already embarked on a similar brick and mortar strategy that ultimately struggled under the high overhead expenses, inventory levels, and logistical needs to maintain a nationwide retail network. And a lot of the electronic superstores that Apple was partnering with, they were struggling with the breakdown in their business models. CompUSA, Circuit City, go find one now. But as we know, Steve Jobs was not one to be denied. For at least 2 years prior to that announcement, Jobs had already been working quietly with current and former executives from The Gap, Target, and Victoria's Secret to help make this retail strategy a reality. And that brings us to our question of the day. Where were the first two Apple stores located? The answer, in the posh Washington, D.C. suburb of McLean, Virginia, and in the Los Angeles suburb of Glendale, California. It started with two. Those stores, which opened 4 days after the May 15th announcement, were cavernous, despite the fact that Apple only had 4 product lines at the time. Remember, this was 6 years before the iPhone era even began and 9 years before the introduction of the iPad. So the stores were pretty much just arranged around Mac computers in the front quarter of the store, with the rest of the square footage devoted to software, accessories, and then services like that theater for educational programs or the Genius Bar where you can get your computer repaired. In May of that year, Bloomberg Business published a headline that said, "Sorry, Steve, here's why Apple stores won't work." Now, that article proved to be terribly misguided in hindsight, focusing heavily on sales. But ultimately, the stores were much more about the presentation of Apple products rather than the hard sell itself. In fact, Steve Jobs said that himself. He said the product was not the most important thing here, and that may be why the stores proved so successful. They were stylish, with comfortable, minimalist surroundings on the inside and creative architecture on the outside that was less brick and mortar and more glass and sandstone. It was all part of an aesthetic, a vibe that crafted an image of a company that was selling a lifestyle, selling an ethos, selling street cred, if you will. And it was an image that fueled the growth to more than 500 stores today, and it has fueled sales growth at that company for 23 years and counting.